Start this. Good evening, everybody. I am so happy to be able to host all of you today. My name is Julie Rayner, and I am one of the librarians at the High Point Public Library, and I am so honored to be able to lead this little conversation tonight, hosting the authors of the historical mystery anthology, The Deadly Hours. So I'm going to go ahead and start us off. At this point, I am working from home / library, but we are if you don't know, we are a town in North Carolina, kind of midway between Winston-Salem and Raleigh. So that's kind of where we're located if you're not familiar with it. So I'm going to do a little intro stuff, and then we're going to start asking some questions. For The Deadly Hours, it has been described as a stellar lineup of historical mystery authors weaving the tale of a priceless and cursed gold watch as it passes through time, wreaking havoc from one owner to another. And the blurb says, from 1733 Italy to Edinburgh in 1830 to a series of chilling murders in 1870 London and a lethal game of revenge decades later, the watch touches lives with misfortune. The characters are irrevocably linked by fate, each playing a key role in breaking the curse until the watch finally comes to one young woman who might be able to stop it for good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead with the short author introductions, and these are in order of their appearance in the anthology. So the first one up is Susanna Kearsley, who is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author and a former museum curator who loves restoring the lost voices of real people to the page, interweaving historical intrigue with modern adventure. Her books, published in translation in more than 20 countries, have won the Catherine Cookson Fiction Prize, Romantic Times Reviewer's Choice Awards, and several other honors. She lives near Toronto, Ontario. Second up is Anna Lee Huber, is the Daphne Award-winning author of the national best-selling Lady Darby Mysteries, the Verdi Kent Mysteries, and the Gothic Myths series. She is a summa cum laude graduate of Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee, where she majored in music and minored in psychology. Christine Trent, the third one up, is the author of the Lady of Ashes historical mystery series about a Victorian-era undertaker, the Florence Nightingale Mysteries, as well as the author of 3 other historical novels. She writes from her tiny writing nook in her home, where she lives with her cats, entirely too many fountain pens, and numerous research books. And our last author, but definitely not the least, is Candace Proctor, who is the USA Today best-selling award-winning author of more than 24 novels, including the Sebastian St. Cyr Regency Mystery Series, written under the name C.S. Harris, the C.S. Graham Thriller Series, co-written with Stephen Harris, and 7 historical romances. A scholar of the French Revolution and 19th century Europe, she has lived in Europe and various far-flung parts of the old British Empire. Her books are available worldwide and have been translated into over 20 languages. So those are our authors. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start with some general questions for all of you. So just kind of take them as you'd like to. The first one, which is one that I know that many people would like to know. Let's start at the beginning. How did the collaboration on this anthology come about?
So I guess I'll take it. Since,
yes.
I was the initial person, I guess. I had wanted to collaborate with some other authors and possibly write an anthology. Was running around in my head, and I reached out to Christine first because we'd met before, we were kind of friends, and asked if she was interested, and she said yeah. And so we kind of let it percolate for a while, and then I came back to her and I said, what if we had some kind of object that could pass through history? There was a curse, you know, some way to link all the stories. And so we started brainstorming, and I believe it was her that came up with the idea of a pocket watch. And so from there, we kind of talked about what authors we would want to reach out to. And so we reached out to Susanna, because I'd always wanted to work with Susanna, and she jumped at it, and we were super excited. And we had some things happen, and then someone suggested Candy C.S. Harris, and we were like, yes. And so that kind of became our foursome. And there was some up and downs through it, but then we just kind of collaborated all together through email, just kind of figuring out how we wanted it to go, how they were going to be linked, what this curse was going to be. So it was a really collaborative process. Susanna came up with a lot of the backstory for the pocket watch. She came up with the idea of the gold in Cartagena and all that. So it was just a lot of fun to just come up with, to all of us work together to come up with this story.
Anybody else want to chime in on that one? Okay, so how about this one? How much did each of you learn about pocket watches during your writing process? And how much about cursed objects?
I wouldn't say that, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Christine.
I don't know if I learned so much about cursed objects, but Susanna really took the helm in terms of developing what the pocket watch was going to look like. I mean, and it was thorough and detailed. I mean, she literally went and found an antique piece and with beautiful photographs that was the item to use. And it was absolutely gorgeous. And I really had no idea how intricate a pocket watch could be. And anyway, as I said, she really took the helm on that, and it really made it, I think, sort of come alive for all four authors, that we were able to see something that was real, that was antique, and that you could imagine being sort of cursed.
I think it always helps me when I'm writing. Like a lot of the time, I don't get blocked very often, but I think a lot of the time when I do, it's because I don't know what I'm looking at. I whether that's the surroundings of the place I'm writing about or the object that my characters are holding. So I wanted right from the bat to kind of have a real watch that I could imagine that my characters are holding and passing on. And my grandfather on my dad's side was actually very into clocks and pocket watches, and I'm lucky enough to have a couple of his timepieces that got passed down to me. So we used to call him Grandpa TikTok. That's how that's how obsessed he was. So I knew that things like the material that the dials were made out of, that type of thing, changed as time went on. And it's surprising how intricate some of the timepieces were for that early. When you're talking about 17th century watches, they still had quarter chimes. They still had all these things that you wouldn't expect them to have. So I was just kind of, I went looking through some of the collectors' sites on the web, and I was able to find something that was really absolutely beautiful, because you want it to be physically beautiful. This watch, this treasure, this thing that people lust after all the way enough to want to possess it. It can't just be a womp womp watch, So I found this absolutely beautiful piece, and then we all just kind of built on it. What would be in the engraving? It wasn't just, it doesn't physically actually exist. We created our own watch. What would be chased around the edge of it? What would be on the outer case? What would be on the inner case? Where would the mermaid be? That sort of thing. And it became really, really fun, to do it. But having the physical watch and having the inscription and what would the inscription say and that sort of thing, I might get a little obsessive with these things. I don't know, but it became kind of a fun thing for all of us. I think that was part of the back and forth too. There was probably, I don't know, about a month where we were just kind of tossing that back and forth. What was the actual physical watch? And it was fun.
At least a month.
Yeah, little obsessive, little.
Yeah.
So here's one that I happen to know that you all are talked about quite a bit. For the format for this anthology, all of you writing novellas, what was that process like for you? What were the challenges? What were the highlights? Candace, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I was brought in at the tail end because there were two other people who shall remain nameless who were in the original project, and then they dropped out, so they needed somebody to come in. And the people who dropped out were going to write the last two. So when they brought me in, they said, you can do Sebastian if you want, but I looked at the stories they already had, and I thought, we don't need another 19th century one. So that's why I offered to do a completely different story with different characters set in World War II, so that I could actually finish out the saga without the other authors needing to readjust their stories. So it was actually kind of good that I came in at the tail end, because I came in at it fresh, and I was able to look at what they were talking about doing, and then come up with an idea that fit that.
And Candy came in late, but I think she was like the first one done with her story, so that was pretty fun too.
Yeah, little terrifying. And I can't imagine any other grouping than the four of us. You know, I honestly, I'm a big believer in things working out the way they're meant to work out. And I honestly cannot imagine any other grouping of novellas other than the one we ended up with. I just do not think that anything else would have tied everything together as well as it did. And, you know, the way her story finished everything off, I was just in awe reading through because we didn't read each other's stories. We sort of knew the way that things were going to get pulled through, but we didn't sit down and read each other's stories all the way through until, you know, sort of everything was all the way done. And just seeing how it all pulled through, it was just really amazing. And of all four of us, only Anna had written a novella before, right? So yeah. That was kind of, I didn't know that. I thought I was the only one that was like completely mucking up with it. So that was kind of an adventure for all of us too.
And I had only written one, so I wasn't really a pro.
Yeah, but really kind of an adventure and neat for all of us to be tackling, and like it's a completely different way of writing. Completely different way of writing.
Yeah, I think all of us tend to write longer, and so we really had to struggle to learn to get it all in to the 20-25K words when we're used to writing 4 to 5 to 6 times longer books. So I think that was a challenge for all of us, just the learning to adjust the story and drop some of the subplots and all those things that we usually include in our books.
Yeah. I'm not used to writing tersely. I'm used to having a long time to twirl everything out and lay out the clues and get to know characters. And when you're cut by 75% in your word count, there is no time for that. And yet you are trying to create a book that is still just as interesting and reads as in depth and is as detailed for the reader. You don't want to disappoint the reader. So you're still trying to do all those elements just in 25% of the space.
Exactly. I mean, you'll have a side character come on, and you know, and they want to take up the space they would normally take up in a novel. They're like, nope, right. No time for that. Just like, you know, go sit over in the corner, and everybody else has to. Because we're writing short, you know. So yeah, I think Candy was the first one. You were the first one done, weren't you? You were.
I was. Yeah, I was. It was during the election, and I was very distracted from the Sebastian book I was writing. So I thought, well, I'm just going to put Sebastian aside and do this instead. And I'm a plotter. I meticulously plot a story out before I start. And so I mean, the one problem I had was that I realized I was so conscious of the page count that I was shorting my character development. And I had to go back and make sure I made these people real. And gave them depth, especially since they were not series characters. But in some ways that was good, because I would hate to have been trying to develop my Sebastian world with such a short little.
Right.
So I could really pare down the number of characters that I introduced, and that helped keep me down to the word count.
Well, and the emotion is really nice, and like the when you've just got that focus on the few characters, I found the emotion in your, and for people that haven't seen the very first interview we did, I'm going to be on Candy's butt for like the next few years to try to develop those two characters, Rachel and Jude, into a series. So I'm warning you now. But in case you haven't seen, I think there's at least one review now on Amazon where somebody said exactly that. Like, these characters could carry a full-length novel. So there you are, Candy. These characters could carry a full-length novel because they are really, really cool. So I am not alone. I'll be starting a petition after this, just. Yeah.
I think something else that happened too, and maybe Anna could speak to this, maybe she feels the same way. Another challenge is for those of us that were writing stories that were, sort of continuations of our existing characters, it was, okay, how do I introduce this character who's already had 6, 7, whatever adventures, introduce this character to potentially a brand new reader, yet make it so that that reader can pick up, understand the character, and it be a standalone, assuming that that reader has no prior knowledge of anything else that the character has done. So that, I actually found that to be a very interesting challenge to write. What do you think, Anna?
Yeah, I agree that definitely. I mean, I feel that way a little bit about every book I write, because when you're starting a new book, it's like you've got to get that balance of introducing the character to people who may not have read the other books, but not make it so lengthy that it's boring. And when you're writing for people who do know the characters, and when you're writing a novella, you don't have those pages to have that backstory. So yeah, that was definitely a big challenge, and it helped. I pared back the characters. There was some characters that are like the personal servants I barely had on the page, if at all, because there just wasn't, there was no time. And so that helped. But yeah, definitely that was tricky, finding that you don't want readers to jump in and feel like they're missing something. You want them to be intrigued to keep reading, but that they don't have to read the other stuff to understand. So yeah, definitely tricky.
And I guess, Christine, also when you're like, for you guys too, you have to write it so that if a reader never reads the novella, it doesn't affect your series, right? So it has to stand apart from your series too, in a way, right? It has to enhance the series, but not affect the series, which would be really tricky. Right? And
Susanna's was a little unique and interesting because she was sort of resurrecting two characters that she had written long ago, and there had been a story she wanted to write about them, regarding Mary and her fairy tales, and this became the vehicle to do it. But it wasn't ongoing characters for her, yet they were characters from a previous book. So yeah, they just walk around all over the place. My characters, they just totally unruly,
float in. Yep. Sorry, Julie. Speaking of being unruly, this is what we do.
We're doing our own questions.
I want you all to do this. I don't need to ask all the questions. That kind of leads into another related question would you write in collaboration like this again, and why or why not?
Oh. I would. I really enjoyed it. So I definitely would if it was the right idea and the right plan and the right story idea and the right group of authors and all that. So I'm a yes.
I would love to. They would just have to give me like a long lead in, because it took me, they all finished their stories within, I don't know, it was under 6 months at least for all of, probably like a couple of months for all of them. It took me 3 years, 3 years to write my novella. And that's what it takes me, to write the longest of my longest novels. And they were so patient. They were so understanding. And, it would be sort of like Anna and Christine would have to come up with the story and tell me first, and then bring the rest of the team in like a couple of years later. And just, to make it easy on everybody else. But yeah, I mean, this was just a wonderful experience. I just loved it. I really loved it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I like to do things in between every couple of Sebastian books, because I feel like it helps keep me fresh, and I come back to the Sebastian series kind of revived. And the nice thing about a novella is for some of us, they're quick.
Is it really, Candy? Is it really?
It really was.
And I would echo what Anna says, that I would absolutely be all in, with the right project and the right theme to it. I had a great time, and I don't know that I realized that it took 3 years. Are you sure it took 3 years?
Yeah, pretty sure. I'm pretty sure.
He's like,
I think if we track back through the emails, I think from the time that I actually started writing it to the time that I handed it in, when you guys were like, grayer and older and just sort of patting me on the head, had moved on to other projects and forgotten all about me. I think it was like 3.
But it was still a very fun collaboration. The four of us, Susanna talked about, we were sort of the right 4 people brought together. I mean, we got along beautifully. We were able to collaborate very well. The ideas flowed very well across the 4 of us. There were never disagreements or anything like that. It really was a very pleasurable project.
Yeah. And still is. It still is. We've been looking forward to this stage of it. We've been looking forward to this.
Yes.
Wonderful. So here's a unrelated somewhat question. It's more about your writing process. You all write listening to music. If so, what music inspired or accompanied your current story?
I do. I listen to music, but it has to be music without words, without lyrics. So like I listen to a lot of soundtracks. I listen to like classical music, and I was trying to think back because it's been a while since I wrote the novella for the anthology. So I don't know if there was a specific one. And sometimes I don't really have a specific soundtrack or whatever that attaches to each story. Sometimes I do. For example, Mortal Arts, my second Lady Darby book, the Inception soundtrack, like I can't listen to that and not think of that book because that's just what I listened to on loop. The 1917 soundtrack I used last year writing my Verdi Kent book that I wrote last year. This year, whatever it was. Anyway, so so I like listening to music, but I can't have lyrics. It distracts me. So
I listen to Tibetan singing bowls. I find them very calming, and they kind of put me into a semi-meditative state that I find makes it easier for me to access my subconscious and just let the words flow. So yeah, singing bowls.
I like it.
They work.
Similarly to Candy, I don't listen to music per se. I like more white noise type programs, and there's some really good ones out there. But there's a favorite one I have that I think it's called Playground. So it's the sound of children laughing. You can hear birds overhead. You can hear some wind blowing. It's a compilation of sounds, and it's just something that it's in the background for you. And I find that is very effective for me versus music. I can't focus with music because music I listen to, and so it takes me out of it. But hearing the children laugh and the birds overhead and things, it makes me feel like I'm just sitting outside writing, and I like that.
Yeah, I tend to I create playlists that I listen to not so much when I'm writing as before I'm writing or when I'm thinking about the novel. I was born in the 60s, raised in the 70s, 80s, so I'm a kind of like MTV baby. And so what'll happen is the characters will start moving almost like a music video, and they'll play out a little scene from the book. My process is very visual. It's very subconscious visual. So if I hit the right song, which usually happens when I'm driving and I can't write it down, so something will come on the radio, and my characters will decide that they're going to play out in my subconscious while I'm driving, which, sorry everybody else on the road, a scene from the novel, and then I just download that song onto my iPod or my phone now. Sorry, I'm not that old. Sorry, not that out of touch. I download it onto my phone, and then I just add it to the playlist. And when I want to see deeper into that scene or get that character moving before I write one of their scenes in the book, then I put it on. So for Weapon of Choice, because I was dealing with Hugh and Mary, I just went back into the playlist I had used for Desperate Fortune, the songs that made Hugh move. Come Home by One Republic was the song that was playing when I first got the idea for the novella. That was sort of, one of Hugh's big songs. I got it right here. Let's see. Broken by Lifehouse. I mean, that's one of his. I'm Yours by The Script. Like he was very eclectic, but he's a big marshmallow. So he's like this big scary guy, but like he has all these like ballads that are, his whole playlist is all these like mushy ballads. That was what originally let me know that there was a lot more to the character than I was seeing on the outside of him. So it was really fun to kind of get into his character and see the softer side of him in the novella. But that's what I'll do, is I'll put the headphones on and I'll listen to the playlist, and then the character will start moving and I'll start writing around the edges of whatever it is I'm seeing, and then the headphones come off. But when I'm writing, I can't have noise. The white noise app to block out everything else that's going on in my house, or I have to be writing while everybody's in bed. And so I'm doing a lot of 4 a.m. writing right now. I'm sort of staying up, and the dog and I are up at 4 a.m. looking at each other going, why are we doing this? But everybody's home now, right? Because it's a pandemic. So everybody's home and walking around my house, and it's very hard to find silence.
Mm-hmm. I had to laugh a little bit because I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. So like I have to have some kind of music when they're awake. Yeah. Because otherwise that's all I hear. Yep. And I was laughing because Christine was talking about the playground and the children laughing, and I was like, come to my house.
That's when that age, Anna, that was when I used to go up to the bathroom and I would put on the bathroom fan and I would lie in the tub, and you put the bathroom fan on it and be in the tub, and it was like having one of those sensory deprivation tanks, and you could not hear anything. It was none of this like he's touching my, none of it, none of it. And I would get the best story. I still do. I still keep like a pad of paper beside the tub, and I write a lot of scenes like in the tub, because it's just like that's where I got that white noise app idea, because it just blocks everything out, and it hits a part of your you go into like what they call theta mode, right? So hits that part of your subconscious that just is good for creativity. But yeah, that's what it came from, because it was two kids. My husband would come home with like, okay, bath time, and bathroom fans are wonderful things,
So I know most folks haven't read the book yet, and this is a tricky question, but are there any tidbits from the stories that aren't in the blurb that you could share with everybody that won't spoil everything? Or is that too tough?
I will say that my Undertaker character, she's a Victorian Undertaker, and she's very no nonsense, and the idea of a cursed pocket watch is something that she is not, that's stuff and nonsense for her. But maybe by the end she doubts a little bit. Maybe something happens that makes her doubt that just a little bit, whether or not something supernatural could have happened. That would be a tiny tidbit.
I think all of the stories have that element, that there is a logical explanation to everything that happens. So you don't have to believe in the curse for the story to make sense. It doesn't rely on it. It's just always kind of there as a possible explanation. And characters, to one degree or another, kind of begin to wonder about it, but still have their feet on the ground.
I think it's kind of fun. I don't think this is in the blurb. There's actually something in each story that has to be done to break the curse. And so that is one of the elements that pull it along. And so I think it's a fun thing for readers while they're reading to be noticing these things. And there's actually a fairy tale that's in Susanna's story that one of the characters tells, and that kind of it encapsulates that. So it was a fun little element we got to weave into it.
Yeah, it like at the risk of like, I mean, fairy tale. It is a fairy tale. It's the time period I'm writing in 1733, my character Mary Dundas is sort of, she's influenced by the women who came out of the French court who told classic fairy tales, the kind that were then sort of stolen by the men like Charles Perrault, who learned them at the knees of their aunts and then published them and became, you know, celebrated for them, and the women just kind of fell by the wayside. But the classic fairy tales were not intended to stand alone. The classic fairy tales were intended to be woven into a novel, and they amplified the theme of the novel. And so that's what I kind of did with I used them in The Desperate Fortune, because Mary told them all the way through A Desperate Fortune. So I used them in the novella for the same reason. She's kind of trying to pass a little message to Hugh, and this just, and it was really, again, it was really cool how Candy was able to kind of bring that in her story at the end, and I won't spoil it, but she was able to kind of wrap everything up at the end just perfectly. And that's, but for me, that was kind of part of the fun of seeing how, when you're working with other authors, how you're it's like a relay race. You're passing the baton to somebody else who picks it up and runs with it, and they each put their different spin on it. It's like the game where you start a story and someone else picks it up and adds a little bit to it, and before you know it, you've got this amazing story that is better than anything you dreamed it could have been. So it's really a mystery in 4 parts. It's yes, they're standalone novellas, but they fit like little blocks in together, and I think that's really cool.
I thought the most fun was in doing the figuring out of, okay, how do we get the watch from this story to that story? What is the mechanism, the unique mechanism to make the next character find the watch? I loved that part. To me, that was my favorite part of the collaboration.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, doing the thing that's going to move it along and the breaking the curse, you know. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty fun.
So here's a question I was wanting to ask y'all. So in the stories you wrote, you and in your other writings as well, you include strong female characters that are fairly independently minded. Some might even say ahead of their time, coming on the heels of the commemoration of the 19th Amendment. How important is it to each of you to portray women's voices authentically in your stories?
Well,
Nobody's gonna jump first.
Start.
I'm by training a historian. I have a PhD. Used to be a history professor. So getting things historically right is really important to me. You don't want to sit and watch Hamilton with me. But I think the key to creating a character from a different period, a female character that is still comes across as vital to a modern reader, is to recognize that there were always women who marched to their own drummer and did things that their society didn't approve of, or at least didn't approve of the way they did it. And the secret to really carrying it off is to remember that you need to show that this woman's behavior is not accepted by the people around her, that people are shocked, that people are disapproving. I think that's the key to doing it right, because these women did exist. We just have to remember when we write them to keep their contemporaries with the period's attitude towards gender differences in gender roles, so that the reader is reminded that this is not normal, but yet people did do it.
And I think also it depends on which society you're putting them in. I mean, I write a lot about 18th century and late 17th century Scotland, in which strong women were you know, all over the place. And, you know, it was very normal to run into very, very strong women. I was just doing down a research rabbit hole in which, not the Countess of Errol that I write about in The Winter Sea, but her mother-in-law, the previous Countess of Errol, was being brought down to Edinburgh as a prisoner and was giving them all kinds of grief because she wouldn't go into the prison that they wanted her to go into, and they didn't know what to do with her. And you know, so that is very common for the time period that I'm writing about. And even the common women were not going to lie down and take things quietly, and that was accepted. You didn't just muck about with women in Scotland at that time period. They were known to be very strong. They were known to be very intelligent, and they really ran their households. So if you write a submissive woman in Scotland in that time period, you better have a good reason why you're doing it. And it's a matter of sort of understanding your time and place and what you're writing about. So I just think a lot of the time you have to remember who's writing the history. Mm-hmm. And how much of what we accept as history is maybe not history. And always try to go back to the original documents, always try to go back to your primary sources and see see what the actual voices are and what the actual try to put those back on the page. Some of the women I write, I was able to find their voices, in little notes and letters that were maybe preserved in their husbands' letter books, because their husbands loved them, and they, like the notes that they wrote to their husbands, their husbands would keep them in the letter books and stuff. But their voices are more authentic than what a male historian 200 years later was saying of them. So I try to preserve those voices, and that tells me more about the society they lived in than what Mr. Macaulay decided to write about them in his time period, right?
Towards women were formed during the Victorian period, when they did try to put women in a home-like setting, so that if you go back at other periods, women were frequently widowed early, and they would take over their husband's job. They might not be able to be in the guild, but they would hire people who would do the work. So they did play a much more active role earlier than what the picture that we have that comes down from that Victorian attempt to shove women into this the mother role in the home, and that the idea that they didn't go out anywhere.
And I will follow up with what you're saying, Candy. That is the thing that my research showed, is women have always worked. I mean, they worked in the businesses with their husbands. To not work, that was a luxury thing, much as it is today. You know what I mean? It was a luxury to be able to stay at home. And I do get asked, would a woman have been an undertaker? Is that realistic? And what I would say is, to be alone in a business like that, probably not. Primarily from the practical standpoint of, a woman probably could not be lifting dead weight, literal dead weight, but it doesn't mean that there wouldn't have been a family business. That, undertaking has traditionally been family businesses, and the husband would have done one part of it and she might have done another part. Maybe she kept books, maybe she kept the shop. Women always, they've always worked and been involved, so.
Yeah. Just as an example, this is the different series that I write. I read about a Verdi Kent, my Verdi Kent series. She was a spy for the British during World War I. When I first started writing the series, most people were like, women didn't work for the Secret Service in World War I. Yeah, they did. The problem was that none of those records were released until the late 1990s and 2000s. And then all of a sudden it was discovered thousands of women worked for the British Secret Service during that war, whether it was in the offices, the various intelligence agencies, or behind, the German occupied countries. They were gathering intelligence, train watching posts, all those kind of things. They just kept their mouths shut. And what's interesting is that they didn't tell their family. They weren't allowed to. So a lot of these families found out in, 2000, oh my goodness, my great grandma was a spy, you know, and you know, they kept their mouth shut like they were supposed to, but then there was all these books written by the men who ran the Secret Service talking about how women shouldn't work in intelligence because they can't keep their mouths shut. I mean, like, you can read these things and it just infuriates you because they don't make sense. They're bashing women for the very thing that they were doing, and they're heroes and they didn't get their due. And so I'm really passionate about that because I feel like these women should be, you know, recognized for what they did. And so, you know, that's just one example. So, I mean, we just found out that all these women did this, and, you know, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
So I'm going to move over to some questions that some folks had sent in before our visit here tonight. And this first one relates to what we've just been talking about in one way with the research that you do. Could you all talk a little bit about the challenges of researching for historical fiction, especially since right now most of us are having to do virtual research, can't actually visit museums and libraries in person, how that's affecting your research for your stories and novels now?
I can say that for myself, I've done a lot of traveling in the past that has satisfied a lot of what I need to do moving forward. And thank goodness for the internet is all I have to say for doing lookups and things like that, so that I'm not finding as much issue right now in this pandemic, which I really hope is over soon. I really do.
I get a lot of help from people for the book I'm writing at the moment, which is a sort of prequel companion book to The Winter Sea. I have, you know, I was fortunate enough to do a lot of the traveling, the on-site traveling before the pandemic hit, obviously, to Edinburgh. But I'm also getting help from the Murray family, the Murray Parker family on Abercairny, and the descendants of the Grahams, who are featured in the book, and the librarians and everybody that I come into contact with in Scotland who look things up for me and are really wonderful. And a lot of it, a lot of my day is going through primary documents, which I can, if I can't order them, order copies of them and, you know, stick them up on top of my bookcases. I've got boxes of documents, which, you know, my husband is just thrilled about. But I also, there are websites like the Hathi Trust, HATHI trust.com or org. I can't remember. I decided it's on speed dial on my computer. And archive.org, which I know a lot of people hate, but if you don't use the modern stuff and you're just focusing on the old books that they've got scanned in, oh my gosh, you know, like you can get like 17th century, 18th century books that I used to have to travel to some little tiny library in the middle of Nottinghamshire to go look at that one copy of the book that
Mhm.
you needed to access. So it's just a lot of the time I can, you know, I'm spending my time reading that type of thing, and I can flip to that really quickly. And photographs, paintings, that type of stuff. There's so many images online that I can look through when I'm trying to see what something looked like. Maps, Google Earth, you can go walk around a place that I can't get to because it's frustrating. I can't get there, but I can go wander around on Google Earth, or I can get in touch with a librarian or a museum curator. Is what I used to do in my previous life. I was a museum curator. You can talk to people that live in the place that you want to go to, or that your book is set in. And if you make a personal contact with somebody, a lot of the time people are just really nice, and they will walk out their door and go tell you what something looks like, or they will take their iPhone and snap you a picture of, you know, the harbor or the pier or something that you want to get a picture of. And so I always try to make that connection. Twitter is wonderful. You know, I can't tell you the number of times that I've, you know, been writing something and I'm like, you know, what does the dashboard of a such and such car look like? And you just put it out on Twitter, and in half an hour somebody sends you the picture of their car, you know, from the, so you improvise, you make do, you do what you can do. But no, research it's a never ending rabbit warren for me. And for me, the challenge is always getting out of the rabbit warren and remembering that it's about the story. But I love the research too.
I tend to overdo my research. I have to keep reminding myself that I'm writing a novel and not giving a lecture series on something. The internet is incredible. I look back at stories that I wrote at the end of the 20th century, and I think, how did I do that? Where, you know, I had to work to find all of this stuff. When now it's just one, you know, a couple of clicks away. The story, I'm lucky that the story I'm writing right now, it's another Sebastian story, but in this one, Sebastian and Hero go to Paris in March of 1815. And I lived in Paris for a year. I wrote a history book about the French Revolution. So it's, for me, it's going back and revisiting, you know, an earlier time in my life and digging out books that I knew I kept all those books, moved them all around the world for the last 30 years. So that's been easier for me. If I were doing something completely new that I did need different, branch out in a completely different direction, it probably would be more difficult. But like you said, the internet is wonderful for Facebook or Twitter. You just ask and people will come back and tell you. There's amazing number of experts out there on the most tiny little mundane details that are always more than happy to supply something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ran into a little bit of a hiccup because the book I'm working on now is set in an area of Yorkshire I didn't get to visit in the past, and I was supposed to go this summer and we didn't go, obviously. But like the others have said, you know, you just reach out, and it's set in the past, so it doesn't look the same now anyway, but
right.
You know, so a lot of it's finding those resources from that time period. What did it look like? But also, you know, reaching out to people and asking for help, you know, tell me, you know, these things. And also reading material from the era that was written in that era, if you can find it, because they are describing what it looked like and smelled like and all those kind of things, what it's, you know, the sounds. So, you know, it's just getting creative, I guess. What you can't, you know, do now, you just have to get a little bit more creative. So.
Yeah, you find all the travel guides, everybody going up from London into Yorkshire and talking about what they didn't like about it. And that's exactly what you need, right? Yeah.
Trying to think if we have a short one to end on, because we're starting to get towards the end of our time. I guess another thing that is interesting, because I feel like it came up in all of your stories in the anthology, was the idea of home. So what does home mean for you in the context of this anthology and of these stories?
That's a tricky one. Let's see, I'm an engineer's daughter, and my dad worked in management, but on construction sites. So up until the time I got married and started having my children, I moved probably every 2 years of my life and lived in various countries. So it wasn't just Canada. I lived in the States, I lived in South Korea, I lived in Wales, I lived in different places. So it's kind of a running theme in my books that somebody pointed out to me, and it's one of those things that when someone points it out to you, you can't unsee it, you know, and that my books always feature someone going into a place where it's not their home, and then dealing with these issues of, you know, like what does constitute family, what does constitute home, and where do you actually belong. So it's this little sub theme that runs through my books, which is not surprising because that's kind of been my life of, you know, going into these places that are not my birthplace. but I always find really nice people wherever I go. I think that as I age more and more, and I'm in my mid-50s now, the conclusion I come to is that home is the people that you gather around you, and not necessarily even your blood relatives, but the people you gather around you. And I think that is certainly a sub-theme in Weapon of Choice, because for Hugh, who is he's a Highlander from the Inverness area, and his home was literally destroyed, like literally burned out in the wars there in the 1715, and he's just been rootless ever since, and this is something that he's kind of dealing with. So he's creating home. He's, creating home for himself with Mary, and that's sort of at the core of his conflict in this story, is how to protect that, what he's creating, when this thing comes in and threatens to turn it all upside down.
I think my attitude towards homes probably comes from the same thing as Susanna's. My dad was an intelligence officer in the military, so I grew up moving around, and I traveled around a lot, moved around a lot in my 20s, and then I married an international businessman. So I just lived, all over the place, and I actually sometimes contemplate the idea of home. What is it that people feel like when they feel like they belong someplace? It's not part of who I am. I don't feel like I belong any particular place, and I don't know if that comes. I think maybe in a certain sense it does come out in Siren's Call, my novella, because the hero, Jude Lowe, he is. His father was in the military, and he was torn away from his family's birthplace, Shropshire. And he has now moved out of the milieu that his family was innkeepers and smugglers, and he has gone to Cambridge, and he's educated, but he still feels like he doesn't belong anyplace anymore. He doesn't belong in Shropshire with the innkeepers, and because of he doesn't have an old family name and an estate, he's not accepted by his contemporaries someplace like Oxford. So he is kind of adrift in the world too, still trying to figure out who he is and where he belongs. So it's an interesting question, the whole idea of what is home to different people.
Wow, this has been really great. I want to thank all of you again. I also have some other thank yous out there. This event was made possible by the folks at Source Books and Poison Pen Press, and I really appreciate them allowing you all to spend this time with us this evening. And I also want to give a shout out to our local independent bookseller, Sunrise Books. Angel has been wonderful, and if you are in High Point, please consider stopping by Sunrise and getting your copy of The Deadly Hours. And if you aren't in High Point, please find a local independent bookstore and purchase the title from them. They will appreciate the business, especially right now. And if you have a local public library, you could get it there too. But that's one of those things that I feel like I worked in an independent bookstore when I was in college, so that's important to me to support them as well. So I want to thank you all again, and thank all of you for coming and participating, and I hope to see you all soon.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank
This has been
you.
really nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Angel.
Thanks for reading.
Thanks.
Yes.